Okay, great. So thank you very much for having me today. I got some of your questions that you sent ahead of time. Um, and feel free to add more questions while we're speaking here. Kyle, is that your cat? That's a really cute cat. Okay.
Would you like to introduce yourself first? Yeah.
Oh, sure. Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Aaron. I'm 30. I was born in Canada, and I've moved to Israel since then. 6 years ago. I officially belong to Stockholm University in Sweden, but I live and I work in Israel. A lot of my work is done online with surveys and things like that. How do you say? I'm married. I have 2 kids. We had a dog for a very brief period, but the dog is no longer with us. Am I talking too fast? Is this too fast?
No, completely
understand. No, it's good? Okay. Okay, great.
Your English is great.
Okay, great. What else can I say? I have a brother-in-law from Sao Paulo, so this is nice.
Brother-in-law? What does that mean?
Brother-in-law?
No, I mean, are you married to someone who had relative?
My wife's sister is married to a Brazilian.
Your wife's sister is married to a Brazilian. Okay.
Yeah. Actually, his family is Israeli, and they moved to Brazil. So he's Israeli Brazilian. I think you would say Brazili, but what else?
We're discussing if you were Israeli or Swedish. So,
right.
But none of them speak Canadian.
I spent some time in New York also. I did my BA in New York. That's where I met my wife.
Yes, it would be nice to explain what does BA mean for the kids.
Oh, sorry. Yes, sorry. My first degree. You say first degree?
Mm-hmm. It's a bachelor of
bachelor's degree. Actually, after high school, I came to Israel for 2 years to learn in, I guess you would say seminary, religious school. Mm-hmm. Then I went to New York to get my bachelor's in psychology. And then I came back to Israel where I spent more time in seminary. I'm actually an ordained rabbi as well. And I finished my master's degree, I guess 2 or 3 years ago. And I only recently, a couple months ago, started my doctorate. And in the meantime, I'm also working as a Sorry, what was that? I'm also working as a therapist, as a clinical psychologist as well in a psychiatric ward. So patients with psychotic disorders or severe depression, or like manic episodes, fun stuff. What else about me?
How long have you been ordained a rabbi?
I actually have one more test to go. So, but my graduation was what, 3 months ago? Yeah, so recently.
So your family is completely Jewish from Canada, then?
Yeah, I grew up sort of culturally Jewish, but not religiously Jewish.
Oh, okay.
And so becoming religious is something that I did when I was like a teenager. So it's, I study, religion and spirituality, and probably, you and your class know that religion and spirituality can be a journey. So when I was a teenager, I sort of looked more into the practices, of Judaism. And my wife actually similarly grew up sort of culturally Jewish, but not practicing. So on our own, we sort of made that journey together. On our own, we each made that journey, and then we had a lot in common coming from a different background. Yeah.
Excellent.
That's me.
Great.
Okay, should I get to some of the questions?
Yeah. Let's start with the questions, and I would like the students to ask them to you. So let's take turns.
Oh, great. That's amazing.
If possible, right? Okay.
Yeah.
So let's start with Amanda. I think Amanda has a question about your background too. Let's see.
Yeah. Okay. You said that you moved to Israel when you were how old?
Well, I came to Israel. A lot of Jews from all over the world do like a gap year between high school and college, where they spend in like full-time religious studies.
Mm-hmm.
People come from South Africa and Australia and the U.S. and all over. It's sort of interesting. I don't know if any a lot of people take a gap year to do community service or volunteering or semester abroad, but I don't know of like any other group that has such a widespread like among Catholics. I don't know because I'm not Catholic. But it's not, I don't imagine it's such a widespread thing that people go away for a year to religious school. So yeah. And then I was 18 and 19 when I did those 2 years. And then when, 20 till 23, 20 till 24, I got my bachelor's in New York and got married and then came back.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how was your adaptation in Israel? It was hard to adapt in a new country, new culture.
I had a harder time adapting to New York, to be honest, because Canada is very slow, relaxed, polite, friendly. There's a lot of nature. I grew up doing a lot of canoe trips and hiking and stuff. And coming to New York, there's a lot of tall buildings that block out the sun. Sometimes steam rising from the sewer grates, the subway there. So that was pretty hard. In Israel, it's a little different because there's a lot of nature to explore. And you have as a religious person, even not religious, most of Israel is not religious. But culturally, you have so much in common. I wasn't fluent when I came, but, conversant enough to make friends. And, certainly I'd learned about the history. So it was an interesting opportunity to connect with my roots. It really wasn't something so foreign. Yeah.
Very nice.
When I go to Sweden, I started going to Sweden a couple months ago when I started my doctorate, and that feels like a totally different cultural experience. Even though whatever, as a Caucasian person in a Caucasian place, I looked like a lot of other people, but it felt so different.
Nice.
Very nice.
Yeah.
You can ask all the questions you have.
Okay. And why did you choose to study psychology of religion?
Of religion.
In your website.
Oh, you saw the website?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay, great. I'm in the middle of updating it. Okay. What's it called? We have a newsletter if you want to sign. Why did I study psychology of religion? Well, think that for me, what's really interesting about it is beyond the personal narrative, how I feel personally connected to it. When you think about parts of psychology, psychology is made up of the way we think and also the way we feel, right? and whatever, there's also a biological, physiological component that, not Lucas, that, was it Lucas who wanted to be the scientist? That Kaya wanted to be, there's also the physiological aspect. But most people think about the way we think, the way we feel. And religion is sort of one of those areas where they come together, where the religious beliefs are things that we, it's not clear when you think something and when you believe something, when you think about faith, or you think about, you think about the way community gets together to pray together. Some of the things that are more logical or less logical. Religion is, in politics, it's a little bit harder to remember this. People, when they think about climate change or they think about particular politicians, so obviously emotions and, beliefs are intertwined, right? Mm-hmm. But for religion, it's, people use religion to cope, to feel better. People use religion as a way of making meaning out of their lives. And people also study religion intellectually, the history of religion. So for me, that's why it's interesting. Also, as a therapist, the way that religion can sometimes be a positive influence on someone's mental health, or also a negative influence on people's mental health, to me is fascinating. For example, one of the projects I'm working on right now is, if any of you have heard of attachment theory. Any of you familiar with attachment? Attachment is, it's a theory connected to evolution that explains a lot about how parents and their infants, develop their relationship. Sort of the child, because the child is so vulnerable when the child is born. It needs ways of reaching out to the parent when they're feeling threatened or scared. Right, so crying would be a way of getting the parent's attention, or social smiling. Right, like sometimes children smile not because they're happy, but because they want the attention of the. So attachment theory is like there's a whole lot of literature on it, and some people have looked at the relationship between people and God as sort of an attachment theory relationship, where just like a parent can be a safe haven, like a support for the infant when the infant is scared, God can also be a source of support. And just like a parent can give children a sense of security to take on challenges and explore their environments, religion can give us resilience, security, confidence to do those things. So those are just a number of reasons that I'm fascinated.
Excellent. That was a great response. Thank you very much. We have many other questions. Let's. I think Amanda has one or two. Yeah. Let's see.
Yeah, but actually, my last question is connected to what he was explaining right now. But
okay.
John Bowlby, John.
Excellent. So let's go to Lucas. Lucas has a few questions, very interesting ones. Lucas, there.
Oh my God. My first question is, in your opinion, the society is a reflection of religion, or religion is a reflection of society?
Sort of interesting. I saw that question on the list. That's it's an interesting question. Actually, there was a very interesting article that came out in the last year that asked whether the concept of an all-powerful, omnipotent God evolved out of the human need to have bigger societies, beyond the sort of tribes, or if the belief in a big God came first, and that led to bigger societies. I think, that relates to your question. you know, certainly the religious values that people have, you know, go a long way into shaping societies, even if they're not religious, because, you know, all of humankind has a common history. You know, you can't really separate, for example, Western civilization from Christian, you know, value backgrounds, a background of Christian values. Again, the question was, society is a reflection of religion. Well, when you think about it, they sort of both come from the same. Again, that's why attachment theory is so interesting to me, because the basic systems that we have of fear, of hope, of all those things, we internalize from the structures outside of us, like from the relationships that we have with other people, and we also project onto the communities that we make around us. Right, the same way that a child seeks out a parent, so we often seek out communities, if it's based on religion, or if it's based on a hobby, or if it's based on you know, anything shared, you know, anything that's in common between. Did I answer that question? Did I understand properly?
Yeah, I understand.
Do you mind, maybe if you could be a little bit more precise in the question? Because, you know, one of the things that's confusing for psychology of religion is that some things are inherently religious phenomena, and some things are more like political, that then get fused to religion. Is that more what you're talking about?
Yeah, so in my mind, so I think this question is so difficult because it's you're talking about something that you don't know completely. You don't know completely, so it's so difficult to explain.
Okay, so I want to know, like, how do you realize your research? Because I know that in biology, the way that scientists do the research, but I don't know how this happens in psychology and in the area of science that you're studying. How do you realize research?
Realize is actually a false cognate, remember? So it's not how do you do your research, how is it implemented?
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. How do you do your research?
But actually, we have the same thing in Hebrew, that you know, whatever, a bunch of, you know, English is very hard to learn because there are so many exceptions. You know, for me, when I had to learn Hebrew, you know, there has a lot of these, like, to be real, you know, to be realized. Yeah. It's interesting how, like, anyway. Okay, so you're right. It's not like a hard science, like in you know, in biology and chemistry, you put something on a scale and you get a reliable measurement, you know, within 0.01%, right? Or, you know, you replicate this in experiments, you get the same results basically, right? So in psychology, there's a lot of different things. There's, first of all, psychology includes, for example, you know, whether it's neuroscientific studies, you know, studies of the brain, or, you know, macroeconomic trends that, you know, are related to people's well-being all across the world. The way that, you know, for most, you know, measures, I assume you mean like surveys, right? Questionnaires. One of the things that psychologists use frequently are surveys or questionnaires, or, you know, tests. So those tests have to be what's called standardized. That means you know, if you want to build an intelligence test, you have to give the intelligence test to I don't know, 10,000 people, in every single country, all over the world, of different ages, of different, ethnic backgrounds, of different, socioeconomic levels. So that's what we call standardizing. And the statistical methods used to do that are many and varied. One of the things that is becoming more, right now psychology is going through what's called the replication crisis, where a number of like the really splashy headline studies that have happened over the last couple decades, 50 years, are being reevaluated. So if anyone ever heard of the Stanford prison experiment? No, Stanford prison experiment? Basically,
Stanford prison.
Prison, yeah. Mm-hmm. So basically this crackpot professor took 20 college students, told 10 of them that they were going to be like police officers, and the other 10 that they were going to be like captives, and then put them both in a basement that he built into a jail, and basically put the officers in a position of power and wanted to see how long it would take them to abuse that power. So we don't do studies like that anymore because it's unethical and crazy, psychotic. But or like Milgram's experiment, where he said I wonder how many people would give deadly electric shocks to another person if an authority figure told them to. So studies like these we don't do so much anymore. But even the more standard studies that that had very exciting findings a couple of decades ago, if you run the experiment again and you don't get the same results, you need a decent explanation for why it didn't happen again, right? So the field is really going through an upheaval because of that. But one of the consequences of the replication crisis is that we're doing more cross-cultural research. Knowing that that religiosity in Brazil looks different than religiosity in Israel, for example, but also to use different methods. And this is really where I get back to your question, that we're not just using surveys, we're using behavioral paradigms. So if I test.
I can add to this question an example from your research, I guess. The well-being, life satisfaction. So you have a set of questions. You ask people to find out how well they feel about themselves. Is that right?
Yeah. So you would say, how do I know that questionnaire is reliable? So what we do is we write a questionnaire based on, we think to ourselves, what would make a person feel good in their life, or what makes a person depressed, right? And we come up with, 50 questions about what would measure depression or happiness or whatever. And then we see, do the answers to those questions predict things in the real world? So do the answers to those questions predict, psychiatric hospitalizations, or do people who are suffering from other diseases also, get high depression scores, or, so that's something called external validity, when you compare, so the results on a test to real world implications, like that, external validity, in the chat. But we have a bunch of, because, so sometimes we have to make sure that our questionnaires are measuring the same thing, right? We can't have one question, we can't have a questionnaire called the depression questionnaire, but in reality the questions measure anxiety, right? So we have to be very careful with what, so we have to be careful because we can't go by the name of a questionnaire. We have to go by what it actually measures in the real world. You're totally right. It's hard to really summarize that issue on one foot, so to speak. But that's sort of why nowadays there's a movement towards using multiple methods to measure the same thing. So you can get also what's called convergent, I'm not typing in here, convergent validity. Nope, that's a B. Convergent. And when things converge, they come together, right? They come together. So convergent validity means when I look at a questionnaire results, it tells me one thing. And when I ask, like for example, if I want to know about a child's ADHD, so I'm gonna run a test with the kid. I'm gonna have the teacher fill out, the classroom teacher fill out a survey. I'm gonna have the parents fill out a survey. I'm gonna take a history of the other siblings, right? So when you have answers that converge, then you can be more confident about the result.
Excellent response. That's great. Thank you very much. Now let's see a question from Francisco. Francisco is a psychologist himself too. Thank you, Kyle.
Well, hello, Aaron.
Hey, Francisco.
And can you talk a little about your research in PhD and what are your hypotheses?
Great question. Actually, I haven't started applying for Amanda. I'm applying. That's going to be a group of researchers all over the world researching religious development. From all types of places in the world and all types of religions. What do children believe about, like angels and prophecy and dreams and how do those beliefs get passed down from the parent to the child? That's what's particularly interesting to me is what we call socialized religiosity. What the parents try to inculcate in the children. One of the things that my professor has found is that the type of relationship that children have with their parents very much influences the way that they perceive God. So if a child grows up with a parent who they feel is patient, compassionate, loving, reliable, then God will also be perceived that way. Obviously if they're in a religious community or culture or whatever. But if it is, vengeful and rejecting, cold, then God will also be, right? Unless, it's interesting because there's also studies nowadays about secular values. If parents are very good parents, loving parents, and they're secular, then it's likely that the children will be secular, right? So that's sort of what I'm working on, and my interest in attachment theory comes in. It's also interesting, what kind of events, can predict like a religious change, whether it's converting to another religion or, leaving religion, leaving faith, right? So, so this is sort of, that's my interest. In the meantime, you know, as I guess Livia was on the site, maybe, I can't remember, someone over here on my screen had seen my my website. No, that was also Amanda. Okay, so the focus has been like really mental health. You know, how religious methods of coping predict mental health. But one of the reasons I've moved to attachment theory and multiple methods is really the question that Kaio raised, because there's so many issues with the measures that we have. You know, that just for example, the main book that we have to diagnose psychiatric disorders is the DSM, right, Francisco?
Yes.
So
DSM 5 or 4?
We use the 5. I mean, I guess in some places they use the ICD, right? Yeah. Okay, the ICD. So the DSM is totally based on symptoms. It doesn't care about why you're depressed. The book. It doesn't care about why you're anxious. It's just there to tell you what the symptoms are. So, and recently, in the last 5-10 years, people realized that, hey, there's a lot in common between depression and anxiety, or hey, people who are addicted to heroin are often also depressed, or people who who have schizophrenia, they also. So there's a movement now to study what's called transdiagnostic disorders or symptoms.
And make the treatment better.
Exactly. That's sort of one of the struggles that I have at this early stage of my career, is that I'm trying to bridge the gap between the things that I see in textbooks and the things that I see in the clinic. So yeah, that's a challenge.
Yeah, I can see it.
Very nice. So let's go now to maybe one of the last questions from Livia. Is it Livia from Lagoa Santa that raised her hand before?
Okay. Yeah.
Yes, Livia. Let's see. I think it's two Livias.
Well, I do have a question, and it is, the childhood is an important part of the life to discover who she or he will be.
Sorry?
Okay, I'll repeat. The childhood is an important part of the life to discover who she or he will be.
Identity development. The way we find out who we are as people.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Yes, I think I have a question related to that I got from the website.
Sure.
Let me just check from your researches.
Well, on one foot, because this goes beyond the scope of my research. This is why, whatever. I had a big glass of wine yesterday trying to think about how it is that I did that kind of work for so long without taking into account the things that I am now realizing. Anyway, I mean, I think that's an important thing to keep in mind whenever, if you're in your personal life and also in your career, that to have an open mind and be flexible, right?
That's right.
Okay, but it was a good glass of wine anyway.
What role do situations of extreme distress, for example, some traumatizing events in your life play? What role do they play in your mental health later in life? Maybe that's something that can address also the childhood and adulthood.
That's a great point. Okay, so the same way that when children are born, they're like baby scientists because they're looking at the world around them and they're forming their expectations of how things go in the world, right? When I hold something up in the air and I drop it, it falls because it's gravity, right? So babies have to learn that. And as babies get older and older, the rules that they learn are more abstract, more complex. Right? There are studies of children the age of 1 year old that already have like the basis for morality and compassion, and what's right and wrong. Right, Francisco? Piaget, right. Well, Piaget underestimated how early this happens. Piaget, I think he said that really this develops at, age 4 or 5. But let's give him some credit because he wrote a lot of his stuff in 50s, I think, the 40s. Anyway, so we're forming our expectations and the rules that we have in our head, the schemas that, or schemata, I think Piaget called them. And a trauma can be, and whenever something breaks those rules that we form in our heads, we either have to redefine our rules or like include that exception into the rule, right? A trauma is like an event in your life that breaks the rules of expectations, right? Like 9/11, you know, planes are not supposed to fly into buildings, especially in New York, in, you know, the invincible superpower America, right? For example, or what else?
Parents,
I don't know. You get the point.
To spank their kids.
Hiroshima, for example, you know, that kind of thing, you know, and there are levels to it. Like, you know, first of all, the event can be so intense in and of itself to be there and experience it. But even from a vicarious standpoint, watching it and thinking, wait a second, people can do that to other people, right? So trauma is a very powerful event, a visceral event that breaks our expectations of the way the world is supposed to work. And when we go through a trauma, we have to heal. So either that's by recreating our expectations of the world around us, or, you know, recognizing that not everything is in our control or whatever. But there's also, you know, post-traumatic growth. People can grow after a trauma, and you know, they can, you know, I think Mr. Rogers, do you know who Mr. Rogers is in Brazil? Yeah. Okay. So he would say, look for the helpers, right? Whenever there's a bad thing going on, look for the people who are helping. So, you know, so much that's fluid when we develop as children. Even the brain, you know, if a child falls and hits their head, you know, the plasticity in the brain, Kyle, maybe if this is a field that you're interested in, this is where the field is going, plasticity and development in the brain. Children amnesia. Right. But not just, but also in a positive way, also in a resilient type of way. Mm-hmm. That children can recover. And so too, when we think about the way that we develop, and you know, everyone has trauma in their life. Trauma doesn't have to be 9/11. Trauma can be being picked last on, you know, for football at recess. You know, no, nobody admit here if that was you. And so the, you know, the hard realization is that we all go through trauma, and trauma is very difficult, but also the promising thing is that we can all recover from it. The trauma doesn't have to own us as people. Yeah.
Very nice. Thank you very much. Very well answered. Thank you, Liv. Excellent question. Do you think you have time for one last question?
I have time for one last question, and if we want to, you know, like if we want to get together again, that's also okay.
Yeah, excellent idea. I think Kyle is loving this idea of having another session. So let's now see the teacher Livia's question.
Okay, so I would like to know how kids see this spirituality thing, and especially their parents, because we know that sometimes we have prejudices around that. People get confused with, you're not listening? Can you hear me?
You said tragedy?
No. prejudice.
Prejudice,
We can see that, and so sometimes people get confused with religion and spirituality, and so I would like to know how kids see that spirituality and their parents. I mean, because it would be nice if the kids could have their own kind of way of choosing, but they are little, and we know that parents and they are correct to say more about that.
You're saying that the parents influence the children with their prejudice.
Yeah, kind of.
So my son is 6. When he was 3, and he started going to kindergarten, there were a couple immigrants from Ethiopia in his class, and he had met, he had seen black people in his life, but he hadn't had like thinking about when people people a different skin color or different country or a different whatever life philosophy, it demands that you adjust your expectations and broaden your perspective. We're hardwired to have compassion towards our in-group and be suspicious of the out-group, right? I mean, I guess this study, where is it? I found it. I've been looking for this.
Let's see the title.
This study, Thinking from God's Perspective, Decreases Biased Evaluation of the Life of a Non-Believer. Mm-hmm. This is actually a study done, how many years ago? 3 years ago. Wow, it's not 2018, it's 2020. 5 years ago. Among Palestinians. I can send you this article if you want.
Oh, please.
Anyway, so this article was a study done among 550 Palestinian teenagers, basically asking them about the trolley problem. You've heard about the trolley problem? Where you can, you see a runaway train going down the track, and it's going to hit 5 people that are on the track and don't know that they're on the track. So you can, but if you switch a lever, you'll move the train in a different direction and kill only one person. So the basic question is, do you do something proactive and kill one person, or just let it happen and kill 5? So in a lot of psychology studies, what they do is they say, imagine the 5 people are, Jewish Israelis, and the one person, the 5 people that are on the track are in your group, and the one person off the track that you would kill by moving the train is in your group. And they found in this study that, and they asked the person, what would you do? What would most of your friends do? And what would Allah do? Or what would Allah, what would Allah say to do? Right? So they found that the disparity between people in the in-group versus people in the out-group was reduced when people answered from Allah's point of view, right? So you see that thinking about your moral beliefs, thinking about your moral beliefs, thinking about common humanity, can really bring people together, even if they have different, beliefs about free will or heaven and hell, so that a lot of things that we have in common as human beings can prevail over the sort of in-group, out-group biases and prejudices that we have.
Yeah.
Okay. Nice question.
Yeah, it was a good question. I'll send I'll send you the study because it's a really interesting study.
Yeah. Great.
Thank you. Yeah.
It'll be good homework.
Thank you.
I have to run now, but this was a really nice time. And if you want to get together again, you know, Corona is going to be with us for a while.